as he charged at the ferocious and eerie monster with a long sword in his hand. Gawain felt no tension, hesitation, or fear in his heart. If he had to say something, it was probably just a little trance and unreality. He still clearly read the moment when his plane crashed. He still clearly read the hundreds of thousands of years he had hung in the sky of this world. He had not yet fully adapted to the identity of Gawain Cecil that had fallen from the sky. However, at this moment, he tightly gripped an ancient family long sword and lunged at a strange monster that was either Adamon or a ghost. Bang! A huge impact came from the blade, and all the distracting thoughts in his mind instantly vanished, dodging the monster's sweeping claws. With almost instinctive reaction, Gawain took the opportunity to twist his upper body slightly, and the swinging blade drew a stream of light in the air, slashing fiercely at the monster's shoulder. As the blade slashed down, he tried to mobilize the power hidden in this body and guide it to the long sword in his hand. The faint red light at the root of the blade bloomed into a bright red light under the stimulation of power and spread rapidly along the blade like a flame. Under the roast of the high temperature, even the surrounding air twisted. The 3-meter-tall monster felt the threat from the high temperature of the blade and suddenly leaned back with agility completely inconsistent with its huge size. As air assault, Gawain missed by a hair. It was the first time to release such supernatural power like magic with his own hands, and Gawain couldn't help feeling a moment of excitement and exhilaration. Perhaps it was this moment of excitement that made him fail to grasp the rhythm of the first attack, but he quickly adjusted his mindset and injected power into the long sword. The skill knowledge from Gawain Cecil in his memory could indeed be called up, and this body had not yet decayed to the point where it could not exert power at all. Although he didn't know how much strength he could exert, Gawain now had a lot more confidence. He began to immerse himself in the battle and tried to convert the combat experience in his mind that did not belong to him into his own usable power as soon as possible. On the other side, Byron was already in a bitter battle. This middle-level knight was one of the best masters in Cecil territory, and his combat experience accumulated in his fighting career before swearing allegiance to the Cecil family was also extraordinary. However, he had consumed too much energy when the monsters attacked the castle before, and coupled with the erosion of the monster's strange magic power, the internal injuries in his body further reduced his combat effectiveness, so that the knight could only exert 40% to 50% of his full combat power. Now facing the monster's continuous fierce attacks, he could only hold the long sword tightly to maintain invincibility while trying to save stamina as much as possible. And looking for the opponent's flaws, Rebecca gathered her magic power, and a burning fireball the size of a head flew out from the front of the staff, colliding fiercely with the shadow arrow of the casting monster in the distance in the air, erupting into a thunderous explosion. Then she took a breath and immediately noticed the dangerous situation on Byron's side, and immediately shooted to the territory soldiers beside her. "You three go and help Byron." A soldier hesitated for a moment, but Lord, Rebecca gathered a new fireball spell and shouted, "We're fine for now, but if Byron falls, it's over. I order you to go in the name of Lord." The 3 soldiers had to obey the order and fight against the terrible monster. Together with Knight Byron, Gawain gradually immersed himself in the battle, and the memories and experience that did not belong to him in his mind were quickly transformed into his own things, improving his control over his new body. This process brought him full sense of achievement. When he slightly woke up from this state of immersion, he found that the monster in front of him had been suppressed by him. The distorted body surging with sludge was not invulnerable. It would still be injured if cut, and it would still die if cut many times. Although, they were extremely powerful and had a size advantage. As long as they mastered the method of confrontation, the human body could still eliminate them. This was the experience left 700 years ago. The monster's claw swept over the top of his head, and Gawain ducked down, backhand stabbing the long sword into the opponent's thigh. The latter finally let out a muffled roar, and its body uncontrollably leaned to one side. Taking this opportunity, Gawain shouted loudly to Byron, "Try to attack their abdomen and lower limbs. Ignore the chest, these guys have no heart." Then, while his opponent was off balance, he turned around and went around to the opponent's side and rear, raising his long sword to stab the monster's lower back. In addition to the abdominal cavity, their other weakness is behind lower back. Hearing the guidance from the and store of the Cecil family, Byron was immediately inspired. With the cooperation of the three soldiers, he quickly contained the monster's sections and drilled under the opponent's crotch at the cost of his shoulder armor being pierced by sharp claws, and turned around to hit the vital point with a sword. And 1 second before Byron solved the enemy, the monster in front of Gawain also fell heavily. After solving the enemy, Gawain immediately looked up at the monster in the distance that was bombarding with Rebecca's fireball with shadow arrows. But just as he was about to rush over to confront it head-on, the monster suddenly let out a shrill roar and then fell down convulsively. Amber's figure appeared behind the monster, twirling a pair of poisoned, fine steel daggers in each hand. "This is what I'm good at." Rebecca put down her staff, her cheeks slightly red from continuous casting. She took 2 breaths to calm her breath, and then corrected seriously. "The ancestor said it was the lower back." Amber twirled the dagger in her hand twice, and the dagger was hidden somewhere by her. She stepped over the monster's body and walked over while curling her lips. Tsk, no sense of humor at all. After the monsters died, they began to disintegrate rapidly, the mud-like substances flowing and surging on. Their bodies first stopped flowing, then gradually dried and solidified, and a large number of fine cracks appeared, with the corruption and falling off of these mutated flesh and blood. They would quickly become huge, twisted blood-colored skeletons. Gawain stood beside the monster he had killed and looked down at the process, as if talking to himself. "So these are the things that attacked Cecil territory." Hetty looked at him curiously. "Ancestor, do you know the origin of these monsters?" Gawain had already shown a deep understanding of these monsters in the previous battle, and even instructed Byron how to deal with them, so this was naturally impossible to hide, and he didn't want to hide it. "It's possible to encounter them if we stay here. Let's enter the secret passage first. There are things in the secret passage that suppress those monsters, and they won't enter easily," Gawain said as he walked forward. "I can tell you the details on the way." After getting into the ancient underground passage and walking for a while, Gawain broke the silence. "I did deal with them back then. In fact, we mainly dealt with those things back then. You should know the history of the collapse of the Gondar Empire and the Second Pioneering, right?" "Of course I do." Rebecca nodded immediately. This history was a compulsory course for her as a noble child. More than 700 years ago, there was only one human country on the Loran continent, which was the Gondar Empire, located in the center of the continent. Historical records say that it was the most powerful empire on the continent at that time, and even the Silver Empire established by the elves in the south of the continent did not dare to easily oppose it. However, later the ether sea surrounding the world was turbulent, triggering a great disaster called the Dark Magic Tide on the Loran continent. The outbreak point of the disaster was in the hinterland of the Gondar Empire almost overnight. The capital of the Gondar Empire and 1/3 of its territory were swallowed by the magic tide and decomposed by surging elemental forces. It was not overnight. In fact, the process lasted nearly a month. The court mages of Gondar were not doing nothing. In the face of the magic tide, Gawain interrupted, then motioned for the other party to continue. But from the result, it's almost the same. Go on. Oh, Rebecca blushed and spoke more cautiously, like being checked homework by parents. After that, the magic tide in the hinterland of the Gondar Empire continued to spread around, and finally completely destroyed the entire country. This was the collapse of the Gondar Empire. After that, with the gradual calm of the Ether Sea, the power of the magic tide began to decrease, and the surviving Gondar descendants began to rebuild civilization. Since the central area of the continent had become dilapidated and no longer suitable for human survival, they left the ruined empire under the leadership of a group of pioneers and carried out pioneering in the 4 directions of east, southwest, and north, historically known as the Second Pioneering. And Store, you were one of the most famous pioneering knights at that time. Well, good job in history, Gawain praised casually. Then you should also have heard that although the magic tide ended, a large number of monsters born in the magic tide still occupied the ruins of the Gondar Empire, and those monsters were one of the biggest threats faced by humans during the Second Pioneering. Hetty's eyes widened. You mean? That's right. Those were the very things we fought against back then. Gawain sighed. They were born from the magic tide, with a silhouette like a human, but they were definitely not human. After the collapse of the Gondar Empire, a large number of such monsters poured out from the ruined Empire Shinderland and continued to spread in all directions, chasing and killing the survivors. At that time, therefore, the first half of the Second Pioneering was more of a flight journey than a pioneering journey. And even after we broke away from the Empire's waste land and established new countries on the edge of the continent, those monsters did not stop. They still continued to pour in from the direction of the Empire's waste land and frequently impacted the defense line of the civilized world. In the first 10 years after the founding of Ansu, I dealt with them almost every day. Rebecca opened her eyes wide, seemingly deeply attracted by these ancient and legendary stories. Did those monsters stop appearing after Ansu was founded for 10 years? Gawain smiled, reached out and stroked the girl's hair, and showed Asmal of looking at Asali Roe. Dear, silly child, then your ancestor hung up. Rebecca, although he had only been with this nominal great-great-great-great-granddaughter for less than a day, Gawain still had a very deep impression of Rebecca, and he suspected more than once that this child's head was clamped by something when she was a child. It stands to reason that it should be, even if the elite education that noble children must receive is excluded. Her identity as a spellcaster can almost prove her IQ. After all, it's not something ordinary people can master to casually rub out a big fireball. In contrast, other people had no mood to pursue Rebecca's thoughtless words at the moment. Even Hetty, who had always been strict with Rebecca, only had deep anxiety now. You mean, the ones that appeared in Cecil territory are the monsters from 700 years ago? Gawain sighed. Judging by your strange look at those monsters, I think you haven't seen them for hundreds of years. The war years with monsters after the pioneering period have become history. Hetty shook her head gently. Although it is recorded in history books, the latest records are at least 600 years ago. As far as Ahavi learned, the monsters wandering out of the ancient empire's wasteland did harass Ansu for a long time. But since the elves helped humans build those sentinel towers, those monsters have completely become a legend. Gawain frowned slightly. Sentinel towers? Things built by elves won't go wrong so easily. This matter must be told to His Majesty the King. Rebecca suddenly clenched her fists and said, "Serious lie. Monsters that have been missing for hundreds of years have suddenly reappeared in the Empire. Someone must quickly send the information back. Moreover, Cecil territory has suffered heavy losses in this unexpected disaster. We must ask the royal family for help." Gawain thought about the own feats back then and smiled confidently. Don Tori, with the status of the Cecil family in Ansu and the influence it left behind, I believe that the city of St. Sunir will spare no effort to help you rebuild the territory. But he didn't expect that when he said this, Hetty and Rebecca's faces not only did not show a relieved look, but their expressions became extremely strange. Gawain was confused. What's going on? Could it be that after 700 years, the name of the legendary founding Duke Gawain, Cecil, is no longer recognized in this country? And Hetty's face looked extremely awkward, and she bit her lips several times before finally making up her mind. "In fact, I wanted to tell you something when I was in the tomb, but I really couldn't say it." Gawain had a vague premonition of something, but he still nodded. "Go ahead, I'm listening." "The glory of the Cecil family is no longer what it used to be, although you are still regarded as the legendary founding duke by the whole kingdom." But Hetty looked at Rebecca embarrassed. "But now Rebecca, who inherits the family title, is only a viscount, and this Cecil territory is also the family's last piece of territory." Gawain was dumbfounded. I remember that when I died, I was already a duke with a hereditary title, and the territory extended all the way from Cecil territory to the Holy Spirit Plain. What did the subsequent Cecil descendants do? Assassinate the king or start a rebellion? Hetty lowered her head in shame. Many things can happen in 700 years, including families and this country. Now Ansu is no longer the first dynasty, but the second dynasty, and the Cecil family is no longer the frontier minister supporting the royal family, but the person exiled by the royal family with a bad reputation. The Rebecca next to her took over Hetty's swords. 100 years ago, the last king of the first dynasty of Ansu, Darien III, died of a sudden illness and left no heirs. At that time, the contradictions within the royal family were already intense, and even Darien's own right to inherit the throne was controversial. After the king's death, the queen and the auxiliary minister failed to control the situation in time, resulting in the Fog Moon turmoil. Royal members with collateral right to inherit the throne fought for the throne in the Fog Moon of Ansu 635. 3 weeks after the end of the Fog Moon, the court struggle intensified into a civil war, and the royal members and the big nobles behind them began to carry out direct armed confrontation. The Cecil family was also involved in it. The root of the disaster was Marquis Grumman. At that time, the Duke of Cecil was old but still very healthy, and his relationship with his eldest son, Grumman Cecil, was very tense. Marquis Grumman probably felt the crisis, so he secretly planned to participate in the civil war that year. Because he had not yet inherited the family power and did not have enough appeal, Marquis Grumman set his mind on the legendary Ant Store. Gawain covered his forehead. "I remember. Did he take my shield?" Hetty nodded and continued to speak for Rebecca. "Marquis Grumman first house arrest the then Duke of Cecil, then took your relic, the shield of the guardian of the kingdom of Ansu, from the ancestors' mausoleum, and then announced his support for Prince Torshu in the name of the heir of the Cecil family. In March of the same year, Prince Torshu was assassinated and died. Then, Marquis Grumman quickly announced his support for Prince Fidik. In April of the same year, Prince Fidik was defeated and committed suicide, Gawain. But this was not over. Hetty still had something to say. After that, Marquis Grumman found an uncle of Dari and 3 again. He used his excellent eloquence to an alliance. But the next month Bren Wild, the Northern Grand Duke who had not intervened in the Civil War, suddenly pushed a teenager onto the stage and announced that the teenager was the illegitimate son of the previous king. Then the Northern Grand Duke used this as a bargaining chip to participate in the Civil War and ended the Civil War in the fog moon of Ansu 636. On the eve of the end of the Civil War, Marquis Grumman wanted to repeat the old trick and announce his loyalty to the new king. But before he could issue the statement, he was attacked by both the enemy and us on the battlefield and died under the chaotic sword. After that, it was the Second Dynasty of Ansu. Of course, the statement about the Second Dynasty is still a relatively sensitive topic now. At this time, Amber, who had been listening silently by the side, suddenly said leisurely, "The whole farce only lasted a year, but it completely reshuffled the order of the whole kingdom. Who in the whole continent does end to know this history? Because the last person to ascend the throne was an illegitimate child. This war is privately called the Bastard War." Hetty said there were many grand nobles involved in the Civil War, so quite a few families were implicated. But this is still a link in the noble rules. In addition, the new king was in extreme chaos at the beginning of the Second Dynasty and urgently needed to rectify the order, which required the power of the old nobles. Therefore, most families were not exterminated, except for those who jumped the most right. The corners of Gawain's mouth could end Thelp twitching. This whole history made him an elder who had overlooked all living beings in the sky for hundreds of thousands of years feel extremely uncomfortable. He could only sigh that life was more exaggerated than fiction. Fiction still had a basic logic. How could that Marquis Grumman be so extraordinarily gifted? "I'm afraid there's no one more troublesome than Grumman Cecil," Gawain said with a twitch of his mouth. After that, the Cecil family never recovered. Hetty lowered her head. "The family's fate might have been worse, but your reputation and the efforts of the old Duke at that time finally preserved the family's bloodline and last bit of foundation. However, since then, the name Cecil has never been able to become the center of the kingdom again, as you can see." Gawain followed Hetty's gaze to look at Miss Rebecca Cecil, whose head seemed to have been clamped. Rebecca noticed Gawain's gaze and turned her head. "Ancestor? Unfortunate for the family. Truly unfortunate." Gawain covered his forehead. Although he was not the real ancestor of the Cecil family, the achievements and bizarre deeds of that Marquis Grumman were so astonishing that even an outsider like him was deeply moved. "And that prodigal son even lost my shield." Hetty and Rebecca, when the old ancestors see old's the great-grandfather, it's better for the younger generation to stay silent. Fortunately, Gawain was not the real participant in the incident. He quickly adjusted his mindset, which seemed to Hetty as extraordinarily broad-minded, and then shook his head slightly. "Forget it. Dwelling on the past one to help our current situation. Regardless, the reappearing monsters pose a huge threat to the human world. The king in St. Sunir may not value the declined Cecil family, but he cannot ignore those monsters. Therefore, he must attach importance to us who survived this disaster." Hetty nodded vigorously. "You are absolutely right." After that, Gawain lost the mood to speak. The dim and narrow underground passage dampened everyone's desire to talk, leaving only the need to speed up and continue making their way. Thankfully, the straight underground tunnel allowed them to cross Cecil territory at the fastest speed, and the near street exit was not too far from the castle. After traveling for a while, Gawain judged from his memory that They had reached a suitable exit. Under the blessing of Earth elemental magic, the ancient tunnel steps had not collapsed at all. Fortunately, the area near the exit was not completely buried by soil and rocks. After clearing some roots, vines, and loose soil blocking the exit, fresh air finally blew on everyone's faces after a long absence. They had re-emerged into the light of day. Knight Byron led the soldiers to leap out of the cave entrance first. After they signaled it was safe, the others filed out. As soon as Rebecca climbed to the surface, she took a deep breath and whispered joyfully, "We're out." Gawain followed Rebecca to the surface. His excitement was no less than hers, perhaps even greater. It was a vast world. His first reaction was to look up at the sky. Unfortunately, it was night outside at the moment, but thanks to the night, he could see the starry sky of this strange world for the first time. A faint white light was already visible on the horizon. The approach of dawn made the stars in the sky appear thin and dim, as if shrouded in a layer of mist, hazy and distant. They were completely unfamiliar stars. The white light on the horizon grew brighter. The night had passed, and dawn was approaching. Everyone who had escaped from the underground tunnel was immersed in the joy of surviving the disaster, while Gawain welcomed the direction of the rising sun with a unique sense of joy and excitement. He opened his hands as if to embrace the sun of this new world. Then he saw an unprecedentedly huge, glowing arc bursting forth with faint light and mist gradually rise above the horizon, casting its radiance across the world. That was not the sun. Gawain stared at the direction of the horizon for a long time. In the first few minutes, the huge cognitive conflict even made it impossible for him to guess what he was seeing, whatever it was. It was far from the sun he knew. The broad and magnificent arc continued to rise, and in the initial stage, it rose much faster than the sun. So after a while, Gawain saw a small part of its arc. The arc was indeed glowing, with a hazy color on the edge and an indistinct, cloud-like structure. The light and heat of this world should be provided by this thing, but its light was not as dazzling as the sun and impossible to look directly at. On the contrary, Gawain could not only look directly at the arc but even see some subtle lines on it. After roughly judging the arc of the thing, Gawain realized that this was an object with a visual diameter dozens or even hundreds of times larger than the sun. Of course, its true size should be smaller than a normal star, but it was so close to the Earth. At this distance, if it rose, it might block about 1/5 of the sky. Of course, this was just Gawain's rough perception, because he was so touched that his intuitive judgment was inevitably greatly biased. It is difficult to describe in words the oppressive feeling of watching a giant celestial body rise before one says. Quickly searching through Gawain Cecil's memories, sure enough, countless equally spectacular sunrises were found in those memories. The thing in the sky was not an abnormal celestial phenomenon, but the most normal landscape in this world. So what was the explanation? Gawain quickly made many interpretations based on the knowledge he mastered. Perhaps it was because the physical rules of this world were completely different from those of his hometown universe. So the light and heat efficiency of stars was quite low, and the planet he was standing on was very close to the star. So such a huge sun could be seen while the Earth was not burned. Or maybe it was not a sun at all but a hole emitting light and heat radiation, or some other unscientific but very magical thing. But it was more likely that the planet under his feet was not orbiting the sun but a gas giant. It was not a planet at all but a satellite of the latter. What rose in the sky was the parent star of this satellite. At this moment, Gawain felt a stronger sense of being in a foreign land than ever before. Ancestor? Ancestor, my lord? Hetty's voice came from the side, finally waking Gawain from his stunned and contemplative state. Huh? Gawain suddenly came to his senses and looked at the great-great-granddaughter beside him with some uncertainty. The beautiful noblewoman had left the dark, narrow, and dangerous underground tunnel and now lightly regained some of her former elegance. She slightly bowed to Gawain. "Ancestor, you were in a daze just now, but we need to leave here first." Gawain mumbled a few words to prevaricate, only then noticing that the exit of the tunnel was an unobstructed hillside. Standing there was indeed unwise when the surrounding situation was unknown. So he nodded. "Let's first go to a high place to check the nearby situation. The terrain Ichno is from 700 years ago and may not be useful today." So the group moved toward a nearby hillside under Gawain's guidance. And on the way, Gawain couldn't help but look up at the huge sun several more times. "Ancestor, my lord, you keep looking at the sun." Rebecca, walking behind Gawain, couldn't help asking with concern. "Is there a problem?" Amber beside her casually said, "Your ancestor slept in the dark for 700 years. Of course, he'll look at the sun a few more times now that he can finally see it." Gawain ignored Amber, glanced at the great-great-granddaughter, and slightly shook his head, confirming in his heart the local people's name. For the thing in the sky, it was indeed also called the sun, or rather, no matter how that word was pronounced, in the minds of the people in this world, the thing that word referred to was the sun and nothing else. Gawain searched the memories of the original owner of this body again. After trying several keywords and vague pieces of information, he finally raised his head with a feeling and looked at the still slightly dim sky on the other side. In the sky that had not yet fully brightened and still retained many stars, he found a star about the size of a grain of rice, brighter than all the other stars. The humans in this world called that special star Ow and endow it many symbolic meanings. In religious and magical rituals, the previous two guesses could probably be overturned, and only the third guess was reliable. Ow was the star of this galaxy, incredibly distant, and its light fell on the earth under Gawain's feet, almost as cold as other starlight. In the cool morning wind, Gawain climbed to the top of the hillside. A land burned by war and in a strange, dilapidated state was presented in the distance. Like strong acid splashed on flesh, the earth was rotten to the core. Large areas of rocks and soil had turned gray-black, and cracks could be seen spreading everywhere. The vegetation on the land had long been completely decomposed, and the remaining tree trunks had all twisted into a demonized state like devil sharp claws. Further away, collapsed walls charred houses, and the Cecil family sentient castle, shrouded in smoke, could be seen. Giant aberration monsters wandered on that wasteland. The fields and crops had long been annihilated in the magic tide kick up by the monsters, and could no longer be distinguished. The family's territory. Rebecca lay on the hillside, biting her teeth tightly, her eyes slightly red, and tears of anger or sadness swirling in her eyes. The girl, who had just inherited the family business and not yet adapted to the role of lord, now seemed to have lost everything. This is what land taint by the magic tide looks like. Gawain sighed. Back then, the Gondar Empire rotted from the inside out into this appearance. I guess the taints still inhabit on the old Empire's wasteland until today, and now new has appeared in the civilized territory. Amber broke out in a cold sweat. By the god of shadows, were we surrounded by these things before? Hetty was thinking about the possibility of the family recovering. Is there any hope? No hope. Gawain shook his head. You didn't block the aberration's attack, and they have formed a group resonance. The elemental infection caused by the magic tide is irreversible, even if all the monsters are eliminated. The pollution entrenched on this land will last for a long time. How long will it last? Hetty still seemed reluctant to give up. Has human civilization returned to the land of the Gondar Empire now? Gawain asked a seemingly irrelevant question. It is still a forbidden zone for life, and the land on the other side of the Grand Barrier is no one dares to set foot in. Gawain shrugged. Then it seems the taint of Cecil territory will last at least 700 years. Rebecca and Hetty looked at the ant store in some surprise. They could not understand why the great figure who founded the Cecil family could be so calm in the face of the destruction of the family's last territory without anger or sadness, as if watching something irrelevant. This attitude even made them a little afraid. However, Gawain soon noticed the expressions of the two and took the initiative to ask, "Is there a problem? Ancestor, my lord, aren't you angry?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "This is the last territory of the Cecil family." Gawain was stunned and immediately realized that he still had not fully adapted to the role. Revealing a flaw, he quickly straightened his face and mustered all his acting skills. Indulging in these things is of no help. Gawain Cecil is a pioneer, and every inch of land and wealth of this family was built by me from scratch. If we don't thave the territory, we don't thave it. We can just find another place to open up virgin land. What's the use of being sentimental? Hetty and Rebecca quickly nodded while secretly admiring the ant store in their hearts, thinking that he was indeed a legendary ant store, and his vision and mind were truly extraordinary. They just didn't know where the ant store planned to open up wasteland in an era when all land had been divided by the existing noble system and unclaimed land was basically a forbidden zone. There's nothing more to see here. We need to plan our journey next. The first step is to find a town, and then try to meet up with the group that broke through earlier. Gawain quickly changed the subject while his pretentious momentum was still there. You remember a knight named Philip led the breakout. Did you discuss a meeting place? Rebecca quickly replied. The agreed place is Tanzan town in the north. If Tanzan is also attacked by monsters, we will continue north along the Kingdom Road. Gawain nodded and was about to leave when a strange feeling suddenly made him stop. After a moment of hesitation, he and Knight Byron beside him almost simultaneously shouted, "Get down! Hide!" Although they didn't understand why, Rebecca and Hetty immediately followed Knight Byron to hide under a nearby boulder, and Amber disappeared into the shadows, and who knows where the moment Gawain spoke. Gawain followed Rebecca to hide but suddenly saw the sea. Little maid Betty standing there with a frying pan. Looking confused, he rushed out and pulled her back, and almost at the next moment, a heart-shaking oppressive feeling descended from the sky. In the rising light of the giant sun, an elegant and huge creature slowly flew across the sky. It was a dragon tens of meters long. In her panic, Hetty instinctively cast a third order spell, Light Bending Field, to hide everyone's figures, but she was not at all sure whether this simple spell could deceive the eyes of a legendary creature. But the dragon indeed did not find the people on the ground, or maybe it simply disdained to pay attention. He or she just flapped their wings slowly, gracefully and majestically, flying across the sky, with the land of Cecil territory destroyed by the magic tide reflected in those huge eyes. Then it spat. Oh! Its breath burned the place. Dragons. This kind of creature had not appeared in the mortal world for a long time. In fact, for most intelligent races on the Lauren continent, dragons were creatures somewhere between myth and reality. They knew for sure that such powerful creatures existed, but basically, no one could see aerial dragon in their lifetime, except for the southern elves, who were mysterious and long-lived. The elves with their long life span were qualified to claim to be witnesses of history. In the long history of the Elven Empire, there were one or two records of dealing with dragons. The elegant and powerful creature with dark blue scales and huge wings thus flew across the sky. Deliver a fatal breath attack. The blazing white fire pillar contained ancient dragon language magic, and its power was no simple flame. Where the fire pillar swept, the earth burst into flames, burning and spreading without fuel. After just a few breaths, the entire Cecil territory was engulfed in flames. After doing all this, the dragon circled here for a while, as if checking the effect of its work, and finally flapped its wings and flew into the sky, disappearing into the brightening clouds. Gawain heard several deep breaths from beside him, including Hetty. Everyone didn't dare to take a full breath until now. If the dragon had stayed a little longer, who knew who among them would faint first from holding their breath? Dragon, dragon. Rebecca tightly clutched her staff, murmuring repeatedly, "Ancestor, I saw a dragon." Gawain coughed twice. "No need to tell me, I saw it too." Rebecca then suddenly woke up, looked at Gawain awkwardly, and then looked at Cecil territory with a complicated expression. After being ravaged by the magic, tied and burned by dragon fire, this place was completely ruined. And those monsters, although troublesome for the poorly combat-trained guards of Cecil territory, they were ultimately just the lowest level mutant. Under the dragon fire, they were almost all annihilated. Even if some survived, their self-disintegration was only a matter of time. After the surrounding environment changed drastically. It thought dragons only appeared in legends. Even the taciturn knight Byron couldn't help but speak. The three soldiers beside him were still trembling and couldn't stand up. But the always strict knight didn't blame them now, just frowning. "My lord, have you ever dealt with dragons?" "No." Gawain shook his head. "Dragons are mysterious creatures. Even when half the Lauren continent was turned upside down 700 years ago, they did not intervene in worldly affairs." Although he said this, Gawain was not too shocked by these huge creatures, because he had seen dragons from other channels. During his days hanging in the sky, he saw this kind of creature appear on the continent, and more than once. But dragons were indeed mysterious. Even though Gawain had hung in the sky for countless years, he had seen very few dragons, and because those images were messy and fragmentary, he couldn't summarize many characteristics or habits of dragons. At this time, the shadow beside Gawain suddenly shook twice. He turned his head and saw Amber standing behind him, the half-elf lady still looking, still in a state of shock. "I saw a dragon," Amber exclaimed noisily. "My mother will never believe it. I saw a dragon that big." All right, everyone here saw it." Gawain glared at the timid and noisy thief. "Where did you go just now?" "Got into a nearby rock crack," Amber said, puffing out her chest. "I'm first class at running for my life." Gawain covered his forehead and sighed. "Shadow affinity is at least master level, but your frontal combat ability is only slightly better than a goose's. You, Ray, actually proud of that." Then he shook his head. "We can't stay here long. Let's leave quickly." He walked down the hillside. Although the dragon had left, no one knew what other strange things might appear, so leaving as soon as possible was the best choice. But Hetty looked at the family territory with a complicated expression one last time. "And store, that dragon burned our territory. He burned our ruins. Strictly speaking, he burned those monsters." Gawain glanced at Hetty. When the dragon released its breath earlier, he had carefully observed that it basically sprayed at the dense street areas of monsters. Although he didn't know why it missed several times, its spraying tendency was quite obvious. Cecil territory was already lost before the dragon came. "But do you still want to seek justice from Adragon?" Gawain shrugged. "Be practical. If we really want to do something, it's to return to civilized society as soon as possible and report everything about the monsters and the dragon. Hetty couldn't refute and could only nod. Yes, in fact, Gawain understood Hetty's feelings. Cecil territory was her hometown, where she was born and raised. Although her hometown had been destroyed, the hurdle in her heart was not so easy to overcome. Even though she knew the dragon had just set fire to the ruins, and this fire might even have been to burn the monsters, she still felt somewhat uncomfortable. After all, this was like whipping the corpse in public. But understanding was one thing, and it was difficult for Gawain to truly empathize. After all, he hadn't been the ancestor of the Cecil family until he climbed out of the coffin. With various messy feelings, the group left the area, and next, a dense forest stood in their way. Hetty held a staff in one hand and drew several bright and dark runes in the air with the other, then looked up toward the forest. "We need to cross this forest to return to the main road. It's the only way to Tanzan town." Gawain looked at the shining runes in Hetty's hand with curiosity and envy. Although he tried to hide it, magic is really a convenient thing. Ancestor? Hetty was confused, then showed a somewhat panic-stricken expression. "Do my skills displease you?" Gawain was stunned. Why would I be displeased? The Cecil family has always based itself on knightly power, and martial arts and equestrian skills are the family's orthodoxy. Those who took the path of mages like me and Rebecca, if it were more than 100 years ago, not to mention the right of inheritance, we might not even be able to gain a foothold in the family. Hetty explained nervously. "It's just, since the incident 100 years ago, the family's status has plummeted. The population has gradually dwindled, and there are few descendants who can master extraordinary power. So paths other than the knightly path have been recognized. But no matter what, this violates the family's rules." Gawain blurted out, "Who set this stupid rule?" He had always deeply hated such typical pedantic family rules. Unexpectedly, as soon as he said this, the atmosphere at the scene became subtle. "Knight." Byron immediately lowered his head and pretended to tie his shoelaces even though he was wearing iron boots. Hetty froze on the spot, and Rebecca timidly raised her finger to point at Gawain. 2 seconds later, Gawain, searching his memories. There seemed to be such a thing back then. The young and high-spirited hero Gawain Cecil, after a triumphant return, drank and celebrated with Charles I, the founding king of the Anzu kingdom. The two friends bragged after drinking, discussing that now that great undertakings were about to be completed. The group who had led their clansmen to escape to the north were now all pioneers and founders. It could be foreseen that in the near future, they would become a wave of first-generation nobles. And as long as they could live and reproduce, these first-generation nobles without any heritage would give birth to ancient families with long traditions. So the two drunk founding monarchs got together and wondered if they should standardize things in advance and formulate some family rules and precepts to prevent future generations from forgetting their ancestors' spirit. As the pioneers among pioneers and founders among founders, Gawain Cecil and Charles I undoubtedly should set an example. So Gawain Cecil 700 years ago took a big sip of high-strength wine, glanced at the knight's sword at his waist, and wrote a line of words on the table with a brush. "Knights are better than mages." Charles I was very pleased when he saw it, and also wrote a line of words with a brush. What Lord Gawain said is right. The former became the Cecil family's ancestral precept, while the latter was remonstrated, backed by Charles I's attendants and advisors. The ministers who concede read the overall situation, and the sober king certainly would not list such drunk ramblings as basic national policies. But Gawain Cecil seriously listed his feelings at the time as family rules, breaking away from the memory bank Gowan looked at Hetty and Rebecca with an awkward expression. He sighed. I was drunk back then. Just pretend this rule does end Texas. Hetty and Rebecca. Just then, a growl from Amber's stomach finally saved Gowan from the awkward situation. Although I know it's a bit inappropriate to mention this while you Ray enjoying family bonding, the half-elf girl said awkwardly, rubbing her stomach. I'm kind of hungry. And Amber Shunger see med to be a starting signal. After her words, several sounds of gastrointestinal came from everyone present. Even Gowan was no exception. Only then did Gowan realize that everyone present had not eaten for a long time since leaving that dark tomb, and he had not eaten for even longer than anyone else the last time he enjoyed the satisfaction of chewing food. The monkeys on the Lauren continent were far from learning to walk upright. Adventuring in a foreign world is far from romantic. Beyond the thrilling ruins, magic giant beasts, and heroic tales, there are countless practical problems to face, like sleeping rough in the wilderness and figuring out how to fill one's stomach. The journey of escape was hasty in every way, especially after the castle was breached and they fought to the last moment with their remaining guards. No one had the time to prepare a knapsack stuffed with dry rations, and besides, their final departure point was the ancestral mausoleum, a place that hardly seemed like lie to store food. So when Amber's stomach rumbled, everyone was jolted back to the pressing reality of their situation. The surrounding area was a wasteland, so barren not even a blade of grass grew. Across the hill lay Cecil territory, now a smoldering ruin, but slightly farther down the slope was a dense forest. In this medieval-like magical world, forests beyond town boundaries were synonymous with danger. Where civilization slight did not reach, there were only beasts, bandits, and monsters. But forests also meant one thing: more food. And to reach Tanzan Town in the north, they had to cross this forest anyway. The group found a flat, open spot at the forest's edge to rest temporarily, then began assigning people to search for food. Gowan first glanced at the dull-looking little maid. This girl named Betty was so unassuming, yet surprisingly bold. She hadn't even cried when the dragon flew overhead, though she might have been too stunned to react. Now she still clutched that frying pan tightly, standing nervously in place. When she noticed Gowan's gaze, she shrank her neck slightly. Betty, Hetty, Rebecca, you three stay here. Byron, you stay as guard, Gowan ordered. The rest come with me to hunt, including you, Amber. Betty had no combat ability, while Hetty and Rebecca were mages. They weren't suited for chasing beasts in the forest. Moreover, they'd exhausted much of their energy and hadn't had a chance to meditate and recover since the castle battle, a critical issue for spellcasters who needed sharp mental focus to use their powers. It made more sense for them to stay and rest, preserving their strength for the journey ahead. The three loyal family warriors had no objections, but Amber stared wide-eyed. Why do I have to go? I'm exhausted too. Gowan shot her a look. Touch your ears, you Ray. Half-elf, isn't it embarrassing to claim tree-dwelling ancestors if you can? To even hunt in a forest? Amber pouted, full of grievance. That's racial prejudice. Who says elves have to hunt in forests? I learned stealth, not ranger skills. You dug up my grave, Amber. Fine. Gowan led 3 soldiers and a self-proclaimed non-hunting half-elf into the forest to hunt, leaving the loyal knight Byron and the 3 ladies to guard the temporary camp. After setting up some warning runes with her remaining magic, Hetty collapsed warily on a rock. Rebecca led Betty in a circle within night. Byron scoured perimeter, then returned carrying a small bundle of dry branches found nearby. After piling the branches on the ground, Rebecca stepped back, raised her staff, and chanted the basic fire-calling incantation. An unstable exploding fireball began to form in the air. Hetty stopped her before the fireball could explode. Let me do it. Once the campfire was lit with normal magical flames, the chill accumulated from the underground tunnel and pre-dawn wind gradually faded. Hetty sighed, looking at Rebecca with a mix of amusement and aspiration. When will you learn magic beyond fireballs? Rebecca hung her head in shame. Sorry, Aunt. Don't look so defeated, even when apologizing. Keep your head up. Hetty groaned, massaging her temples. You ray-addled noble now. Your performance today. Honestly, the ancestor is probably disappointed, even if he didn't show it. Rebecca tensed up. Then, what should he do? Hetty paused, then sighed. What can we do? Look at the family now. I doubt any Cecil descendant would make the ant store proud. We ray a far cry from the family's former glory. Rebecca bit her lip. For someone who'd grown up following the standard noble path, recent events had shattered all her expectations. No teacher had prepared her for facing magic tides, monsters, or an ant store rising from the grave, all of which left the young Viscountess utterly overwhelmed. After a long silence, Rebecca finally mustered the courage to ask, Aunt, do you think the ant store is truly resurrected? Hetty met her niece's gaze, easily guessing her thoughts. Do you doubt the ancestor or his resurrection? I know I shouldn't, but it's hard to believe. I feel the same, but the evidence is here, Hetty said, shaking her head. Remember the first lesson every magic apprentice learns? Not theory or formulas, but a maxim. Truth may contradict common sense, but truth is always truth. This applies beyond magic. Seeing Rebecca deep in thought, Hetty added softly, whatever the reason for the ant store shreddern, his resurrection must be accepted as fact. Betty glanced at the two ladies, utterly confused by their conversation, then lowered her head and stared blankly at her precious frying pan. Soon Gawain returned from the hunt with 3 soldiers and a DI's gruntled Amber. The haul wasn't abundant but sufficient. 3 rabbits, 2 unnamed large birds with magnificent feathers, and a variety of wild fruits, enough to fill everyone's stomachs. Watching Amber skillfully dress the prey, Gawain scoffed, You claim you can't hunt? You ray as skilled as a gray elf from the Mosswood Forest. The Mosswood Forest was a vast woodland on the border between the Kingdom of Ansu and the Western, or Cure tribal nation. Its gray elves, Asabris of elves, were renowned as the world's greatest hunters, even surpassing wood elves in forest tracking. Having recently started studying this world's lore from his memories, Gawain was eager to put his new knowledge to use, attempting to pass as a legitimate local without looking up from gutting the splendid bird. Amber retorted, Classic 700-year-old hero, those gray elf jokes are centuries out of date. Did you know they run herb import-export businesses now? They don't hunt anymore, Gawain. Amber continued working, deftly skewering the cleaned prey on a long stick. Over the fire, she glanced at Gawain. I really can hunt, half-elf or not. I grew up in human society. An old thief raised me. Then how did you learn this? Who needs hunting when you can steal chickens? Amber grinned, as nonchalant as someone who just mocked a gravy robber to their face. Picked up the skills back then, Gawain. Hetty frowned at Amber words. Crude. Amber wagged a finger, guilty as charged. But what's a thief to do? Scrounge coppers from strangers' pockets. Not like nobles in castles who can brazenly tax their peasants. Before she finished, Knight Byron swerved Shing, unsheathed and pressed to her neck. Gawain waved Byron off, then eyed Amber curiously. I mamazed you, Ray. Still alive with that mouth. Let me guess. First-rate escape skills, Amber. All right, park the class warfare for now. We ray all in this together, Gawain said, grabbing a fruit and taking a bite. Focus on recovering strength. Mages, meditate to restore mana. We leave by noon. We wasted one night underground. Can't lose a whole day too. Betty put that down for now. Rebecca called to her maid kindly. You done need it yet? Betty looked at her mistress, then at the frying pan hesitating. Gawain asked, why do you keep that pan? Betty flinched at him, clutching the handle tightly. Mrs. Hanson said, I decook sausages and toast with this pan. Mrs. Hanson managed the castle kitchen. Hetty whispered to Gawain, she scone. Gawain sighed, studying the freckled girl. This pan is yours now. You can set it aside for later. Come eat.